Our episode begins inside of the cockpit with Anakin Skywalker. He was setting up the ship to jump the light speed. He was in a single fighter. He would be able to traverse across enemy lines going essentially undetected. Anakin jumped from system to system, avoiding Separatist fleets and the Sith Empire fleets as well. During one of his jumps, he accidentally found himself on the front lines of combat. Skywalker was very taken aback by the battlefront he came across. It was the Separatists and the Sith Empire trying to cut at each other's throats. It was a tense battle, but it also was ferocious. The droids had superior numbers and several wings of bombers and vulture droids piled up towards the flagship of the Sith Empire. Anakin looked at it and watched as it exploded. The Sith Empire fleet began to turn away from combat and the Separatists pushed harder and harder, destroying ships as they moved to retreat. Skywalker took note of this as he hit the forward throttle and jumped the hyperspace. He was at the last jump before he got to the system he was trying to get to. From Saleucami, it was his next destination. Elsewhere in the galaxy, a Jedi outpost sat quietly on Tython. Jedi Master Ima-Gun-Di and his students stood quiet on patrol. They had amassed a small unit of clone troopers, nearly 600 men or so, to defend this forward outpost. It obviously wasn't enough men to defend the entire planet, but it was simply just supposed to be a forward command post for the Republic. The planet was kind of out of the way, and the Sith had no real reason to invade it, neither did the Separatists, because there wasn't really any people here. Of course, on the newly charted galactic maps, there is no one here. That's what the population said. No one. But the truth is, there were 600 clones and 2 Jedi present. They all waited around, doing patrols and everything of the sort. The forward command post here essentially was a listening station, set up to intercept communication going in and out between the Separatist lines and the lines of the Sith Empire. Everything that was recorded was sent back to the Republic across the Outer Rim so they had information about their enemy. Though there was a darkness approaching, and Ima-Gun-Di and his Rodian student, Vermi Cross, could feel it in the Force, and so they ordered their men to ready themselves for battle in the circumstance that the Separatists or the Sith Empire was coming. Tython was a lush world with several mountain ranges. In between those mountains sat a former Jedi temple. It was here that the outpost had been set up, and it was here where the listening post and the clones were too. Everything operated out of the former Jedi temple on Tython, and it was like a secondary home for the Jedi at this point in the war. The clones rather enjoyed the area, especially because early on in the war, it wasn't too difficult to just enjoy themselves. The clones here didn't have to use their training, they simply got to enjoy the pleasantries of life. Of course they still trained day to day, but they did that to stay in peak condition. Other than that, they just simply went on patrol and made sure that they were receiving communication from other parties across the galaxy. That wasn't until the communication array picked up a frequency rapidly approaching the planet. The clones and the Jedi closed up the Jedi Temple and turned off all communication devices, taking out all the hard drives and keeping them in case there was an attack. They were going to try and use the element of surprise against whoever was landing. With the element of surprise, the clones could likely use their lower numbers to an advantage, make 600 men feel like 6,000 men. When the transports landed, the clones were hidden in the forest, inside of caves and inside of the Jedi Temple. Ima-Gun-Di and Vermi stood side by side with each other inside of the forest. They looked out and saw a warrior of the Sith march out surrounded by 2 marauders and a number of Sith troopers. When they exited the transports, they left at a fast pace, but once they got into formation, they began to slow-pace march through the woods. Once the Jedi had them cornered, they launched an all-out assault on the Empire forces. The Imperial troops were caught off guard as the clones blasted away, cutting through the lines of the troops, though they were heavily outnumbered. Ima-Gun-Di and his student took a step forward into battle position, while inside the caves and temple, Captain Keeley and the rest of the troops waited patiently for their go-ahead. Ima-Gun-Di contacted Captain Keeley and ordered them to launch the counter-assault. The 400 men were outnumbered 3-1, and the clones were fighting an opponent who were trained just as well as they were. These were not battle droids, these were effective troopers, and they were very precise with their aiming and their targeting. The 2 marauders guiding Sion were dispatched to take on the Jedi, while the Sith Lord stood in the middle, watching his men be executed, and then watching the clones who ambushed them be struck down by blaster fire. The battle was an all-out war, as the best troopers fought with each other. Clones were gunned down as the marauders engaged with the 2 Jedi on the battlefield. As it began to look grim for the clone troopers, the rest of their reinforcements came out of the temple and the caves, and they began to open fire on the Sith troopers. Captain Keeley and the rest of the 200 men got into the mix. The clones on the front lines watched as Lord Sion emerged from the ranks of his men, cutting down the wounded and throwing his lightsaber through one of his own troops in front of him. Sion marched to the front lines with his men, and then began to make a push on the clones led by Captain Keeley. The two Jedi were able to cut down the Marauders, though in the process of their duel, the majority of their men had been killed. The Sith troopers started making their way for the Jedi Temple. Their effort was flawless as the clones began to retreat to a more defendable position. Sion could feel the presence of the Jedi making their way through the back of his lines, and so he whipped around his head and looked at the two Jedi as they stammered. Captain Keeley tried to call out to Ima-Gun-Di, but the moment he made contact, Ima-Gun-Di ordered the clones to retreat. The Jedi would hold off the Sith for now. The clones began to retreat through the open field, causing dozens of them to be cut down by blaster fire as they closed in on the Jedi Temple. Sion, on the other hand, twirled around and he swung his lightsaber down and clashed with Ima-Gun-Di. The Jedi Master told his student to assist the clones, but he couldn't. Before he could respond to the order, Sion lifted him up into the air with the Force and threw him into a tree nearby, knocking him out. Sion grinned as he used his brute strength to attack Gun-Di. The Jedi Master was a strong species, naturally strong that is, but Sion was a beast. He used his power and precision to force Ima-Gun-Di off of his game, pushing him backwards. Sion swung harder and faster. Gun-Di's defense could only hold for so long, and then his lightsaber was cut out of his hands as the blade toppled to the ground. Gun-Di turned around and used the Force to pull his student's lightsaber as he blocked a strike by Sion. The Sith Lord saw this to be funny. As he pushed harder, Ima-Gun-Di responded with a parry and a strike as he made his way back to an offensive stance against the Sith Lord. It was very evident that the Jedi Master was a solid duelist. The Sith Lord fell backwards and saw his advantage slip away from out under him. Sion spun around, cutting a tree into pieces as it tumbled down towards Ima-Gun-Di. The Jedi Master reacted, moving out of the way, and then facing down Sion. The Sith Lord threw his lightsaber forward. Ima-Gun-Di's grip wasn't strong as it typically would be with his own blade. He took the hit and then watched as Sion used the Force to pull the lightsaber back towards him, jumping into the air and swinging down on Ima-Gun-Di. Ima-Gun-Di fell back, and Sion jabbed his lightsaber through Ima-Gun-Di's chest, killing him immediately. Sion didn't take much time getting around to Ima-Gun-Di's student, and while he was knocked out, gutting him. By the time Sion got back to the battle at hand, he looked over and saw the clones had been pushed back inside the Jedi Temple. There were about 150 clones remaining, with Sion's numbers just about 700 men. The clones did a solid job at their defense, but they were outnumbered by a fighting force that had solid training. Sion demanded the Sith army to go into the Jedi Temple and fish out the clone troopers and execute them. They followed their orders, as inside, Captain Keeley and his men were reaching out for the Republic, trying to see if they could get reinforcements. Keeley knew the Jedi were dead, and he realized that at this point, they had a better shot of waiting the Sith order out rather than trying to attack in a frontal assault. They didn't have the numbers to pull it off, and they sent their message and departed for the interior of the temple and the cave system attached in the inside. On the other side of the galaxy, Anakin Skywalker arrived outside of Mandalore. Anakin felt called to come here. Something about his vision made him feel inclined to come to Mandalore and find this Duchess that Obi-Wan had mentioned in his last breath. When Anakin got down to the capital city, he was immediately taken into custody. Mandalore had become a very tense planet. While sure, Satine was against traditional warrior ways, the truth is that she knew the importance of standing up against the Sith Empire. As a leader of the Neutral System Coalition, a group of around 1,500 star systems across the galaxy, she understood that peace wasn't an option with a group of psychos that did not want peace. Satine made an effort to have peace, but when star system after star system, Republic, Separatist, or Neutral, all faded out of existence, she realized the importance of standing her ground. While her sister was a part of the psychopathic group of megalomaniacs called Death Watch, Satine made an effort to cut off all ties to the moon of Concordia and lock down what they had here at Mandalore. Mandalore sat in a sweet spot between enemy lines, between the Sith Empire and the Separatist. Her only fear was who would come down first. The Sith Empire wasn't going to go to Mandalore because of their past attempts to deal with the Mandalorians, all of which being travesties from each of their own respective eras. Meanwhile, the Separatists were leaving Mandalore alone because they weren't psychos. Sure, they were fighting against the Republic, but the Sith Empire was a slightly bigger fish to fry, and Mandalore was neutral, so it's not like they had to worry about them. The other surviving neutral systems made an effort to militarize, but none of them could do it as well as Mandalore could. Satine had access to thousands of wartime machines that were used in the Civil War, of which she came to power in. Did she want to use them? Of course not. But the safety of her people came first, and she was going to ensure her people remained defended. Regardless, when Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker was brought to the throne room to face her, she was very confused. She would have assumed that it would have been Obi-Wan Kenobi, though she was truly worried. She had heard reports about what happened to the Jedi Temple temple on Coruscant, and she feared for the worst. Though, when her guards brought in Anakin Skywalker, she was confused. She firstly asked why Anakin was here and what his name was. Anakin admitted that he wasn't really sure why he was here, but his master was Obi-Wan Kenobi. Satine subtly gasped. She looked at Anakin and asked if he was alright. Anakin looked away. He frowned, looking back up to her and revealing in his hand a little medallion. Anakin told Satine that he was unaware of his own place in the galaxy, but Obi-Wan's last breath were to give this medallion to her. So he decided that that would be the first thing he would do before deciding where his place was in the entire galaxy. Satine stepped forward and looked down at Anakin's hand. She recognized the medallion. She'd given it to Obi-Wan right before he and Qui-Gon left Mandalore for the final time. She looked away, choking on her tears in sorrow. She held her breath and forced the tears back as she turned back to tell Anakin that his master was the kindest, most gentle man she'd ever met. Anakin smiled. Yeah, he and Obi-Wan butted heads a lot, but what Satine said was true. Obi-Wan was a kind soul, guided by the Force, and by a beautiful light that sat within his heart. Anakin lifted the medallion up and handed it to Satine, as he asked what it symbolized. Satine told Anakin that Obi-Wan and her had an extended mission when he was a Padawan. During that extended mission, as far as Satine was concerned, they fell in love. It seemed as if it were true, because Obi-Wan's last thoughts were of her. Satine carried on by telling Anakin that she didn't want to force Obi-Wan to choose between the Jedi Order and her, because she knew how much he cared about being a Jedi. Part of her always wished she told him about how much she loved him, but she knew she couldn't take the Jedi away from him. Little did Satine realize that had she said the word, he would have left the Jedi Order. Satine took the medallion, and inside of it was a small crystal. The crystal, when given to Kenobi, was clean, but when she looked at it, there were scribbles on it. Though when Satine took a deeper look, she noticed somewhat of a translation, in Mandalorian that is. She giggled for a moment, remembering Obi-Wan and how he used to try and speak her native language to appease her when they were on the run. She always made fun of him for it, of course in a loving way, to which he always responded with an equal level of sass and wit. The saying written inside a medallion was mostly correct, but the sentence said, "My heart will forever belong to you." Satine looked at Anakin and asked if she could excuse herself for a moment as she stepped out of the room. It was too hard to hold her tears back, upon learning of Obi-Wan's death, but this confirmed what she always believed, that even the Jedi way couldn't keep them separated, star-crossed lovers if you will. Part of her was saddened that she never got to tell him the truth, but the other part of her was always happy to know that Obi-Wan likely knew the truth, just waiting for her to make the move that she needed to make. Eventually, Satine returned and asked Skywalker if he would take a walk with her. He nodded his head, and the two of them started off. Satine asked Anakin why he was questioning his purpose in all of this. Anakin started to tell her about everything that had happened, that apparently, like Obi-Wan, he too fell in love with someone with political power. Though, for him, the inverse happened because she died in the Battle of Coruscant. Satine was saddened to hear of the death of Padmé Amidala, but she was also saddened to hear for Anakin's struggles. For Satine, she felt a connection to Skywalker, because to her, Anakin was Obi-Wan's student. Because she loved Obi-Wan as much as she did, she believed it was her duty to fill in where Kenobi could not, and so she told Skywalker that she might not be a Jedi, but she fell in love with one. She told Anakin that he should trust his intuition. It will not lead him astray. Anakin nodded his head, and then he looked back, telling her that he was confused. She then reminded Anakin that the strongest are forged from darkness. Anakin too would learn that should he continue down this road. She asked Anakin what he thought Obi-Wan would say to him. Anakin smiled slightly and stopped it. He looked over at her. He said that Obi-Wan would have likely reminded Anakin that the Force was his ally, not his competition. Obi-Wan would have looked into Anakin's eyes to remind him that he was much more incredible than he ever gave himself credit for, though Obi-Wan would have likely humbled him immediately afterwards by telling him to be more patient with the process. Satine smiled and pointed at him. It was patience that he needed. Anakin smiled and looked down. Satine put her hand on Anakin's shoulder. She told Anakin the path was his to choose. The choices were his to make, but Obi-Wan, no matter what, would always be with him. Anakin looked at her, to which Satine pointed to Anakin's chest, suggesting that Anakin will carry Obi-Wan in his heart on his journey. He just needed to trust himself to make the right decision. Anakin thanked her for all of her kindness and guidance. He asked her if there was anything he could do in return. She shook her head before saying to Anakin to keep making Obi-Wan proud, because as long as he was proud, she would be too. Anakin should always remember that he has friends here on Mandalore. Anakin thanked her and bowed respectfully. She watched as Anakin left, and then she looked down at the medallion and wrapped it around her neck, and almost immediately felt Obi-Wan's presence, or as Satine would simply refer to him, as Ben. As Skywalker made his way back to Ahch-To, a communication came into the Republic High Command. The Jedi Council was discussing a lack of communication coming in from Master Imogundi from the planet of Tython. Captain Keeley came over the comlink and informed the Jedi that Tython had fallen. The Sith were here. They had killed most of their forces. Jedi Master Imogundi and his student were killed in combat. There was one Sith Lord present. He wasn't holding back, and the comlink cut out. Blaster fire rang out, and from the corners of the room Captain Keeley cried out, telling his men to fall back, before the sound of a lightsaber ignited, and swooping and swooshing through the clones could be heard, before the communication was cut off by a thermal imploder, likely thrown by a clone trooper trying to protect the location of the Jedi. It worked, but the clones and their fate were undecided. The Jedi Council and the rest of the high-ranking military personnel stood in silence. They all thought about what to do. Admiral Yularen informed the Jedi that this was not a time for rush action. There was no guaranteeing that those troops survived, let alone having to sacrifice a fleet to destroy a Sith fleet. Though the issue was that there wasn't a Sith fleet. It was just simply a landing party. Commander Cody came over the intercom and told the Jedi and the Admiral that they could dispatch a recon group of clone commandos to Tython to discover what had happened and if there was any real purpose to send an invasion force to Tython in the first place, because Tython had information they needed. Windu looked over at the other council members as they nodded their heads, but first Windu asked if there were any available commandos. The truth is, a lot of commandos had been killed at the Battle of Geonosis, and there weren't a lot of them to begin with. Most of the commandos were doing intense covert missions across the core and northern galactic map where most of the Sith Empire had ravaged the galaxy, trying to start up rebel cells and even reported there were survivors of fallen worlds, though Commander Cody told the Jedi that there was a squad of commandos coming out of Kamino in need of positioning. They could either be sent to Tython or they'd be sent somewhere else in the galaxy that likely needed backup or troops and support. The Council elected to send them to Tython in the circumstance that there were any survivors. The Jedi were mostly looking for clone survivors. For the clones inside the meeting, this was very important. It showed them that the Jedi valued them, even after learning that their brethren had died in combat. Commander Cody would exit the call and dispatch a squad of commandos to Tython to report back about what had happened there. Hours later, a missing starfighter landed at the surface of the Temple Island on Ahch-To. Anakin got out of the ship. After the temple guards almost stunned him, Anakin made his way to the top of the temple island. He climbed the stairs, pacing himself as he made his way up to the stairs as he looked for Master Windu. When Anakin saw him, his heart pace picked up. The truth is, he was nervous. He almost started a fight with the Jedi Master that had no issue beating him up if he challenged him. Windu wasn't exactly pleased to see Skywalker. Anakin assumed it was because of the fighter being stolen, but actually, Master Fisto stumbled upon Natabre the night Anakin left. Anakin looked a little confusedly. He understood tensions were high, but he didn't do anything to her. Windu told Skywalker he had a lot of explaining to do. Anakin nodded his head, as he prefaced his apology with an apology. He explained that he had lost his mother on Tatooine before the Battle of Geonosis. He didn't have time to process his emotions, and he admitted that while he was a Jedi and that wasn't an excuse, he was going to be honest. Because Anakin could feel emotions more than a typical Jedi, and he tried to shut them off, but it pushed him to a dark side. Instead of going to the dark side, Anakin went down into the cavern below the Temple Island, and was presented with a Force vision. During the vision, he saw Obi-Wan, and his master showed him the medallion that he gave Anakin before his death. Anakin explained that he was confronted by Natabre at a bad time. He didn't want to hurt her, and so he didn't, but he needed to give the medallion to the Duchess of Mandalore. Windu was beyond confused, literally, just so confused. This didn't make any sense, none at all actually. But Skywalker finished everything off, saying he needed time to think alone. Being in a cockpit was the best way for him to do that. Obi-Wan's friend from Mandalore helped him with his grieving process in relation to his master, and so Anakin, because of Satine, Obi-Wan, and yes, Natabre too, felt the call to return to the Jedi and serve them in the best way possible. Anakin told Windu, especially, that he was sincerely sorry for his actions and the stresses he caused others. Anakin admitted that all the attention came from believing he would fail those around him because he was the chosen one. Obi-Wan was an incredible master, and he did it at such a young age. He was as wise as Master Yoda and as powerful as Master Windu. Anakin was very fortunate to have him as a master, and it was because Anakin didn't believe he could live up to the expectations set in stone by Obi-Wan. Windu in a way actually understood where Anakin was coming from. Did he trust Anakin? Not at all. But this was a step in that right direction. Anakin coming forward, admitting his wronging, was something that was profoundly mature for him to do, especially since he got away with being disobedient from time to time with Kenobi. Windu accepted the apology, and then requested that Skywalker return to the Garden Island until he had further instructions to give to him. Anakin nodded his head and smiled at the Jedi Council. Inside of Skywalker's head, he heard Obi-Wan's voice tell him that he was proud of him. It was something that made Anakin's eyes water up as he walked down the steps of the Temple Island. When Anakin crossed the seas of Ahch-To, the first person he ran into was Master Jocasta Nu. Anakin swallowed his pride once again, and told her that he was truly sorry. She nodded her head and simply smiled, telling Anakin Skywalker that she was just happy he had come back. That was the consensus of what Anakin was learning in this moment. The Jedi were just so happy that they had one more brother on their side. It wasn't about numbers or statistics, it was about staying strong, keeping the path of the Jedi, and while Anakin had made his mistakes, he was coming around to making them right. Anakin stayed around Jocasta Nu, helping her out with anything she needed help with. That is until nighttime rolled around, which in reality was only an hour after Anakin arrived on the Garden Island. Jocasta Nu told Anakin that, despite his journey, it was time to take on responsibility. Anakin smiled and agreed. Jocasta told Anakin that he would be managing the first watch of the night. Anakin simply smiled and responded with a simple "Yes, Master." Darkness covered the island. In the time that Anakin had been gone, there had been a little bit of construction on the Garden Island. A little bit of coverings and technology to house the infants of the Force, the ones who had no biological defenses from the natural world. Other than that, it was very much so a work in progress. Anakin wandered around the island, keeping an eye on everyone, making sure everyone was alright. As Anakin kept walking, a little boy ran up to him and asked him if he would be leaving again. Anakin looked down and then looked from side to side before kneeling. Skywalker told the boy that he would do whatever the Council needed him to do. He was a Jedi, and he needed to be sure he did what was best for the Jedi. The little boy smiled and told Anakin that when he got older, he wanted to be just like him. Anakin smiled and told the boy to run back to sleep. The next day would be full of hard work and training. The boy nodded and responded with a "Yes, Master," before darting away into the darkness. Anakin kept walking as he made his rounds. Everything was silent, everything other than the sounds of waves crashing and the slight chill bouncing down his neck and up his sleeves from the wind. As Anakin walked back to his spot, rested a little bit above the rest of the people so that he had a better view, he heard a twig break. Anakin turned around and looked at the flowing robes behind him. Anakin frowned. He asked Natabre if she would mind coming up to the post with him. She nodded her head and followed him up. The two of them sat down, to which Anakin tried to speak first, but Natabre hushed him. Anakin was a little taken aback, but he listened intently. Natabre told Anakin that she owed him an apology. Anakin shook his head, but she gave him again another quick hush to stop shaking his head. Natabre told Anakin that she was sorry for being so pushy, for demanding answers when he didn't have them, for being so stubborn. Anakin grinned. She asked what was so funny. Anakin told her that her stubbornness was greatly needed, but he could also see where the rest of the apology was coming from. Natabre's eyebrows rolled back as she looked at him with a glare, but not an angry glare. Natabre continued as she told Anakin that she often, much like many Jedi, could easily forget that Skywalker wasn't born inside the Order. He had a life, a family, and emotions for several years before he even was told to forget about them. Anakin told Natabre that he accepted the apology, but he would first have to apologize to her. She looked at him and nodded her head, suggesting he go ahead with whatever it was that he wanted to say. Anakin told her that he was truly sorry about how the entire last couple encounters had been handled. There were an array of things that Anakin could blame them on, but he took the responsibility in this moment. He owned his mistake, regardless of what charged those feelings, and he admitted his wronging. Natabre too accepted the apology. Natabre then decided to share that she acted out of line because she wanted to express her emotions, but her training taught her otherwise. Her master was a code purist, but when she was faced with adversity like losing someone she cared about and the place she'd called home for 18 years, she didn't know how to properly convey it. Anakin nodded his head and told her that he understood. His mother died before Geonosis, and then Anakin carried on throughout the rest of those that he lost. Padme, Obi-Wan, the Order. Though Anakin admitted that he learned the value of being a Jedi. Natabre looked at Anakin with interest. Anakin told her that it was the ability to trust in the Force, trust in training, and believe that everything would work out just fine in the end. It was an interesting look at everything. Anakin ended up asking Natabre where her robes came from, and why she was wearing robes of the High Republic era. Natabre giggled, before telling Anakin that it was a family heirloom. Anakin was a little confused until she told him that members of her family had been a part of the Jedi Order for the last 543 years. She was the most recent member of her family to become a Jedi. Anakin didn't understand how at all that was possible. The Jedi don't allow attachments. Natabre rolled her eyes, telling Anakin that she had a very large family, large enough to keep repopulating while sending family members to the Jedi Order, and so, because it was a family robe, it was passed down to her. Inside of her room at the Jedi Temple, there were robes that could fit different future members of the Order, tall, skinny, large, short, whichever. Anakin apologized. The temple was really Natabre's home. It had belonged to her ancestors for 500 years. Natabre smiled and told him that it'd be alright. Everything would turn out better for the two of them. The two of them continued talking throughout the night, getting to know different aspects about each other. Anakin would tell her about his little trip to Mandalore, and she would tell him about her adventures she had with her master before the Battle of Coruscant. For Anakin and Natabre, they had just ignited a flame of friendship, something ever so crucial in an era of chaos. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of part 4 of our miniseries. Again, special thanks to Bendra Wells, Tiger Boy, Darth Revan, Pimp Daddy Bane, Darth Cheesy, Apollo Madman Studios, Anakin003, Lemon Knight, Flynn Van Cease, and Lord Deadwing for supporting the channel. Hit 2,000 likes on this video. The next episode comes out next Saturday. It's starting to heat up. The finale is 2 episodes away. I am really excited for you guys to see the finale. As always, I really would like to continue the series, but if you guys don't want me to, then that's not a big deal. I won't take it personally. You know, if you guys like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. It's not that big of a deal. You know what I mean? And so, I hope you guys are enjoying it thus far. And I'm really excited for you guys to see the finale. There's another mini-series in the work right now, so that should be coming out relatively soon. So anyways, I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.